Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
And also by the planning party or planning workshop. I don't even think we've established a name yet, but this is happening on October the 30th with Amanda McKinney and I. And this is because we've been asked to share this. This is where we walk you through how we do our end of year planning. We share the entire process so that you can repeat this each and every year or every quarter inside your own business. Amanda and I do this every year, and it makes such a difference in our businesses. When you know where you want to go and you have this mapped out, it makes all of your business decisions very clear and easy. Look under trainings and events on theconnectedyogateacher.com to register for that or to find out more. If you are new here, hello and welcome. Returning listeners, thank you so much. This is the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, and I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I'm a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, and a trainer and consultant who works for yoga teachers. And this podcast was created for you, dear yoga teachers, so that you can connect to the information and inspiration every single week and feel supported, because I know that as a yoga teacher and an entrepreneur, there are some tricky days. In today's episode, we're exploring something that almost every single yoga teacher has to do when leading a class: give yoga cues. Usually, most of us are giving cues to our students both visually and verbally, and now there's a new element where we're giving cues online or in person to guide our students in the movements, breath practices, and meditations that we lead. But how effective are our cues? And what are some of the cues that really are not helpful for our students? My guest today, Libby Hinsley, and I dig into how we can give yoga cues effectively. And it really comes down to thinking about the intention behind our cues and understanding why you're doing each movement or why we're guiding students into those movements. We also talk about cueing for safety, the importance of cueing for beginners or those who are new to yoga, and how anatomy can inform your cueing. Libby shares her insights about quote-unquote right and wrong in cueing and what can happen when you use cues that you don't understand. If you have ever struggled as a yoga teacher in giving cues in a yoga class, or if you've cued something and thought, whoops, that did not have the effect I wanted, and I really want to avoid that in the future, this episode is for you. If you are on the go right now, not to worry, we take the notes for you. Our amazing show notes writer, Crunch, does this in such a beautiful way. There are clickable timestamps. You can look for the topics that you're really interested in. Go over to theconnectedyogateacher.com/188, and we'd also love to hear your comments about this episode. Before we dig into today's episode, I want to give a huge shout out of thank you to Schedulicity, who has been a scheduling software company that I have known, loved, and used since 2011. This is almost coming up to 10 years of me using this scheduling software. I did that as a studio manager and also as an independent yoga teacher, and I still use it today to schedule my consultation calls, my podcast episodes, my podcast interviews, and also any one-on-one yoga that I teach. Let's hear our hot tip of the week from the team over at Schedulicity.
Hey Connected Yoga Teachers, this is Shayna with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. Successful full-time yoga teachers have a lot to deal with before they even hit the mat. Marketing, processing and tracking payments, checking people in and trying to make sure they all fit, accounting, keeping up with email correspondence and social media campaigns. You may feel like you need a personal assistant, or maybe you just need Schedulicity. You've spent hundreds of hours learning how to teach others to manage the complexities of their minds and bodies. Let Schedulicity manage the complexities of your online scheduling and marketing. You deserve a few hours to yourself.
Another shout out of thank you to Vivian. Vivian, thank you so much for sending me an email. Vivian sent this really sweet note that said, "Thank you so much for all you do and offer. Through your podcast, group, and videos, you have helped me find clarity in why I teach yoga and what I need to do to really step into that purpose. I am so excited. I'm not sure if I'm saying your name correctly, Vivian. It's spelled really beautifully, and I hope I'm saying it correctly. If you would like to leave us a review and have it read out on the podcast or send us an email, you can do all of that from our website. When you go to the website, you'll see that there's a place where you can leave me a voicemail. That's over on the right-hand side. It says, "Leave Shannon a voicemail." I love to get those voicemails. Also, on our show notes page, you can just click on the button that says "Leave a review." This is such a great way to say thank you to a podcast host. And this week is actually my birthday week. So if you wanted to get me a gift, but you don't know what I would want, I would love a review. So you can head over to iTunes and leave a review, or go right to our show notes page and click on that button that says "Leave a review." Alrighty, let's get digging in. I am so excited to introduce you to Libby Hinsley, who is a licensed physical therapist and a certified yoga therapist who has been teaching yoga for 15 years, training yoga teachers for 10 years, and practicing physical therapy for 8 years. Libby currently runs a private PT practice which integrates yoga and manual therapy, specializing in the treatment of injured yogis, hypermobility spectrum disorders, low back, sacrum, hip issues, and chronic pain. In addition to that, she offers advanced studies, teacher trainings in a variety of modalities. Libby is also passionate about educating yoga teachers about anatomy, and she's developing a new project called Anatomy Bites with Mado Hesseling. Huge shout out of thanks to Mado because she connected me to Libby and told me about all of the specialties that Libby has, and I said, that's it, we have to get her on the podcast. If you want to check out Anatomy Bites, you can. It's under the umbrella of Yoga Teacher Resource. I will make sure that we link to it in the show notes. Through this platform, Libby aims to give yoga teachers clarity, guidance, and support for learning anatomy in a monthly membership format. So let's dig in and learn from Libby right now about the cues that we use, the intention behind that, and why we might want to let a few cues go. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Libby. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited for our conversation.
I'm excited as well. Tell us first about the work that you do and who you do it for.
Okay, so I'm a yoga teacher, and I mostly train yoga teachers as well and teacher trainings. And I'm also a physical therapist and yoga therapist. So I do a number of things. So I teach weekly classes, train yoga teachers, and also have a private practice that is physical therapy and yoga therapy. And even in that clinical practice, I am largely working with yogis who are injured and a lot of yoga teachers who are injured as well.
So tell me, which came first, physical therapy or teaching yoga?
Teaching yoga came first. And teaching yoga is what led me into physical therapy. So I was teaching yoga for maybe 4 years or so. And during that time, I just realized how little I actually knew about the body and how much I wanted to know about it. And especially because people would come up to me after class with their quick question about their, part that hurts. And I realized that those certainly aren't ever quick questions, but I wanted to know more about that stuff. And so that's kind of what led me into physical therapy down the road.
Okay. All right. That's fantastic to know. And so then now what we're going to chat about today is about cueing. And I'm excited because you have both lenses, like the lens of a PT and also a yoga teacher. And so what makes you excited to talk about cueing to yoga teachers?
Yeah. So it's a good question because at first glance, it's kind of sounds like a boring topic. But it's really not, because there's so much underneath it. And I've become really interested in it through teaching anatomy to yoga teachers. One of the workshops that I teach is on anatomy. And I love training teachers in anatomy because it's a place of such anxiety for a lot of yoga teachers. When they come out of a 200-hour training, they only got a short blip of anatomy and they feel really unprepared. And that's how I felt too. Totally relate because I was there. And so that's become a real favorite thing of mine. And what I'm finding is that when people start to learn about anatomy and how the body works mechanically, it really brings up questions about what they should say in the yoga class about the body. And so then we get into all these habitual cues and then start to unpack, what do they really mean? And what am I trying to say with that? And as I understand the body more, those cues have to change, because now I understand what I'm trying to accomplish with the pose. And a lot of people are just stuck in a habitual, verbal cue pattern, and they don't actually have an understanding about what is underneath that cue and what supports it or doesn't support it, whether they should really be saying it or not. But then furthermore, I think that when people get more comfortable with anatomy and understanding their cues, they start to let go of a preoccupation with correctness in asana practice, and then some more interesting goals can arise for yoga practice, right? So that we can actually get somewhere else with the yoga practice altogether and stop being so obsessed with where your knee is over your ankle and stuff like that,
Okay. So when you say these habitual cues, I'm thinking of some that all of a sudden I was in a yoga teacher training and we were all saying the same cue because we were hearing it from the person leading the teacher training. And then finally someone was like, wait a second, what does this cue even mean? And that was a huge discussion. Here we were all saying it and no one really knew what we were doing. So is that what you mean by that?
Exactly. And there are a lot of different ways we cue. Some are specifically anatomy cues, but some have more to do with some energetic quality, that we want to cultivate. So I'm specifically talking about the anatomy cues, what to do with your tailbone, what to do with your knee, where should your this or that be. And the implication of those cues is often around safety. So that the way that I'm cueing you to put your body in this shape is the safest way. That's kind of the assumption. And I like to kind of break out those assumptions and really examine those to see is that really true? Sometimes it might be, but usually it's not.
Okay, this is such a good discussion here. And I want to dig in a little bit more because I know our connected yoga teachers have been asking, especially right now when a lot of us are teaching online via Zoom, because we're recording this in August of 2020. We're still in the thick of the pandemic. Every time I say that, I think, oh, what will it be like when we're recording and it's not the pandemic? Or someone's listening further down the road. But I think whether we're in person with someone or online, our connected yoga teachers are saying, I want to make sure everyone is safe in that class. So now you're saying when we kind of figure out, actually, why don't I let you say that? What is it that you're saying can help us with our cues in terms of safety when you said you like to kind of break out of that?
Yeah. So if we could even take some examples, if you have some in mind, we could sort of unpack them. Like, why would we say this in a pose? And is it really that important? And does it really lead to more safety in the pose or not? And sometimes when we get into questions about safety, we have to really understand the anatomy and biomechanics underneath the cue. And also we have to come to a realization that moving the body in general is not inherently unsafe, right? So, the issue of safety is going to vary so much depending on what kind of practice are you leading? What kind of class is it? Is it a level 10 power hot Ashtanga class? Or is it a basic yoga class, a gentle flow or just kind of a basic movement class? Those are very different. And when we're teaching basic movements, it's generally not unsafe. Whether our knee is 2 inches this way or that way doesn't usually make it or break it on the safety front. But if we're teaching a much more physically challenging class, then we may have some real safety issues to discuss. But my guess is those safety issues aren't going to be about the alignment of a pose, but rather is someone's fitness level really up to the level that that class is asking of them? You know what I mean?
Yes.
So the safety is going to be more person specific what's the practitioner have going on, any special concerns they have going on, rather than some inherent lack of safety about a posture, or a specific way of doing it. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. I'd love to dig into some of the common ones. So a huge one that I hear all the time is, your knee over the ankle. Don't let that knee go past the ankle. Do you want to
That's
talk
right.
about why
That's right.
that's not
Yeah.
really true?
Yeah, it's totally one of my all-time favorite ones to talk about, because it's so prevalent. I mean, I hear it constantly, anytime you bend your knee. Only in Warrior 1 or Warrior 2 actually is when we really care about this, because there are a lot of other poses where no one cares about it. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. And, you cue, bend the knee, but make sure it's just over the ankle. Don't let it go past the ankle. And there's this big alarm system that goes off about knee safety. And, when we use cues like that, in my mind, it's to describe a shape. I have to tell you something about how to get into the general shape, because you may not know what that shape is yet if you're brand new. So I have to sort of describe it. And I think that cues like that are useful because they're descriptive. They describe a shape. But then what happens is it translates into safety. And the implication is if your knee goes past your ankle, you're going to ruin your knees. We're protecting the knee. It's always this protect the knee thing. And what's interesting about that is that the knee is designed to go everywhere that it can go. It's designed to bend on all the angles that it can bend. And those are all perfectly safe unless there's a certain problem with a particular person's knee. You know what I mean? That kind of calls that into question. But in general, it's just not unsafe to let your knee go past the ankle. Now, what could happen for people is that as that knee flexion angle increases and the tibia goes forward towards the toes, there's more pressure on the patella, where the patella meets the femur. The angles change the amount of pressure on different parts of the patella. So it may be uncomfortable. But let's take chair pose for an example. People bend their knees in chair pose and they go way past the ankle all the time. No one ever mentions anything about that. They don't seem to mind when it's in chair pose. Or a deep squat, malasana, has the knee go past the ankle. So it's sort of an inconsistently applied cue, but it's given a lot of importance when teachers use it a lot. So that one's pretty confusing. And the other thing I'll just say about that particular one is when the knee, say we do Warrior 2 with the knee right over the ankle, we do it the same way all the time, then we're building a lot of strength in one particular range, one particular position. And if we don't develop strength in other positions, then we're not as strong there, And so it's very useful to do a pose with the knee at different angles so that we develop strength throughout the whole big range.
Oh, I love this. So that we could play around with it a little bit. We could bring that foot a bit closer to us, say in Warrior 1 or Warrior 2, or see what it's like further away from us and play around with. I never thought of this, of how that muscle develops strength in different places. That's amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really part of the reason I tend to veer away from static postures in general. I'm really more of a movement person. Slow movement is my jam when it comes to yoga. I don't really love static postures. And that's one of the reasons why I want to cultivate a control of movement, motor control and stability throughout a whole range, not just at one point in the range. And I think that's useful. It's useful for my particular body. And it's also useful for a lot of other yogis, I think.
That's so good.
So one of the things I often will suggest to teachers is, next time you get up off your toilet or off of the couch, take a look at where your knee has to go if you are going to stand up. If it doesn't go past your ankle, you're probably not getting up. Or look at your knee when you're going up your stairs, coming down your stairs. You can't do it without letting the knee go past the ankle.
Right.
It's just one of those very functional things that the knee needs to be able to do, actually.
Right. Oh, that's so good. Going upstairs. So we'll watch when we go up and downstairs and when we go to sit down on the couch or the toilet. This is good. Or when we go to get up.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So in that case, it's like, well, do I need to use the cue and freak out about where the knee is over the ankle? Probably not. I can just actually throw that out
Right.
and make space for something else to happen in class. That's what's really great when you start to let go of some of these unnecessary cues, then all this space emerges for some other interesting things. Maybe it's some introspective inquiry, that
Right.
honestly is way more interesting than where your knee is anyway.
Are there some other ones that you can think of? I'm thinking of tree pose and where we position that foot with the knee.
Yeah, that's another one that's like, protect the knee, and the knee's pretty darn stable. It really is. It's not gonna break sideways, So I think it's okay to just put your foot on your leg wherever you want to. If it's uncomfortable, then move it, certainly, but we can really watch for information coming from the body about what position is more comfortable. And we can really trust that and just follow that, rather than acting like one place is very, very unsafe, but an inch south or north is totally safe. It's
Right. It's so ingrained in us in yoga teachers. Are there some other ones that come to mind when you're thinking of cues that we give that we don't need to?
Yeah. So there's a lot of cueing about the shoulders and like squeezing the shoulders back all the time. That's one of the ones that comes to my mind. And almost there's an expectation that the shoulders are supposed to kind of hang off the body straight out to the sides. And it's sort of an aesthetic thing, I think, where I don't know, I guess we're going for this. I don't know why actually people got this in their minds that the shoulders need to be back. Now, if someone's significantly rounded and their shoulders are way, way forward, I can understand that cue, but that's where the cueing actually should be responsive to what we see in class, ideally. Should respond to what I'm seeing in my student's body and what cue is needed in order to achieve whatever I'm after. But that requires me to, number one, know my goal. What am I after? And also be able to be responsive to my students, which does get tricky in the online setting. So we can get back to that in a minute. But so the shoulder blade sits on the thoracic spine, basically, at an angle. And it's about 30 degrees. And that's because the rib cage is round. It's not a square, it's
Right.
curved. And so where the scapula connects to it is at an angle. And so the glenoid fossa, which is at the edge of the scapula, which is where the humeral head sits for the shoulder joint, it is sticking out at an angle and it's a little bit anterior. And there's going to be a range of what's normal about how far anterior that is, but we could kind of go with about 30 degrees. If you're learning it in a biomechanics class or something, you'd learn about 30 degrees anterior tilt there. So the arms are going to hang off the scapula. The scapula hangs off the rib cage and it's round. So I would expect the shoulders to be a little forward. That's perfectly how it is, So that's another cue that if we understood the anatomy, like I just described it, we might kind of let go of our need to have everyone's shoulders way back.
Right.
Right.
Right. And it would vary from person to person. I'm guessing that there would be this difference in where those shoulders sit and also how that body has been through life in its different experiences. Okay,
Exactly.
So this is good. Shoulders
Exactly.
back and down, we can let go of that. What about when we're moving into poses? I do know there's this whole thing of like, how should we cue the shoulders, say, in something like downward dog or in forward fold or extended mountain?
Right. Yeah. So there may be some really good cues about shoulder position in those cases. Let me back up just for a second on the shoulder, squeeze the shoulders back, like Tadasana, kind of Tadasana cue about shoulders back. The other thing to really keep in mind is that the position of the shoulders often tells us something about the spine and especially the thoracic spine, which is very often curved, rounded forward, like if someone has kyphosis. right? So we might actually be seeing a bit of kyphosis in this person's body, but how it shows up, it catches our eye because we see their shoulders are rounded forward. But if we just say, get your shoulders back, we haven't actually addressed the thing that's causing the shoulders to really round excessively forward anyway, which was maybe the kyphosis of the spine. But now we've hidden it. We've squeezed the shoulders back and it sort of looks better to our eye, but we haven't addressed spinal extension through the mid-spine. And that's really useful. That would be a place to really focus.
Right.
So.
And I've heard other PTs describe that sometimes it also we're paying more attention to the low back. Like we might think it's lordosis, where really it's kyphosis more so that thoracic.
Absolutely. Kyphosis loves to hide in the body, and it often hides counterintuitively as lordosis.
Yes.
Okay. So it hides because we want to kind of lift the chest, and then so we end up lifting the front of the low ribs in the front and get this big sway back appearance, which is this big lordosis in the thoracic and lumbar junction. So when a teacher sees that, they're going to go straight for the pelvis and they're going to give some pelvic cue. They're going to say, tuck your tailbone, right? Now we have a posterior pelvis and a displaced rib cage, and it's all wonky. It's
right.
all wonky, right? Right. But if we don't kind of understand, how the rib cage and the pelvis are related to each other, and how they like to stack on each other for optimal just neuromuscular function, then we're not even looking at the rib cage. We're not even thinking that's important. We just kind of see pelvis and low back. But in the end, the thing we might say about the shoulders is actually related to all of that,
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're just kind of masking. Someone walks in, we think, oh yeah, they need their shoulders back and down there. Check. I did that. We're sort of making shapes without knowing what's going on with the body.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there ever times, because I feel like this is tipping into your specialty as a PT, where you would be looking at kyphosis versus lordosis, where us as yoga teachers, we're not diagnosing someone?
Mm-hmm.
Are there times where our cue, here's my question, I think. Mm-hmm. How helpful is it to understand that? And then where do we draw the line of like telling someone, here's what you need to do for this, whether we give them a definition, but like obviously as yoga teachers, we're not saying you have kyphosis, here's what you do. Where do you draw that line when you're teaching yoga versus sitting there with your PT hat on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's an important question for yoga teachers. And I see a lot of anxiety arise in yoga teachers because a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves to, they're supposed to know everything and be able to help their students. Everyone wants to help their students, which is a beautiful sentiment. We all want to help our students. But, a yoga teacher without a lot of other training doesn't have the skills to make those assessments. And yet, verbal cues are communicating a lot of things. So I wouldn't expect a yoga teacher to make any diagnosis ever, or even make a guess, honestly. And this is where, just a PSA, students have a short question after class about their shoulder pain or their hip pain. The best thing to always do is to not answer that question. Just do not answer it. Or practice saying, I don't know. Maybe we could get together for a private session and talk more about it, right? If that yoga teacher felt comfortable and maybe had some extra training around helping with the specific complaint like that. But the best thing is to refer someone somewhere else and to say, this isn't a quick question. It is never a quick question. And it requires evaluation. And evaluation requires that you know how to evaluate something. So, but it comes back to this T-shirt that I want to print that says, mind the gap.
Right.
And we all have a big gap. And the gap is in between stuff we know now and stuff we could know someday, right? With further study. We all have one. But the problem with the gap is that we don't know about it. We don't know how big it is, and we don't know what's in it so much. So I think that's a lot of times why as new yoga teachers, we feel so much pressure that we're supposed to know all this other stuff. And we're not. That's definitely not the job. So I would love to see yoga teachers feel less pressured to know how to diagnose things like that. And that also will come into play with what verbal cues might I use for Tadasana, because we just kind of went through a minute ago talking about pelvic position, rib position, shoulder position, thoracic spine position, and how all those things are going to come together to form Tadasana, basically. What's it look like? Standing mountain pose. And what do I say about it if I see some of these postural kind of, I don't know what we should call it, postural impairments or postural sort of curiosities, But if I say as a yoga teacher, tuck your tailbone, I've taught my student something, and my student thinks I know what I'm talking about. And now they think they're supposed to tuck their tailbone, right, to fix their posture. And maybe it's tuck your tailbone and pull your shoulders back.
Right.
Right. And I've made those statements without really understanding posture and without evaluating this particular person's posture, really. So it's a slippery slope a little bit. And it brings, I think, to light the importance of understanding our verbal cues. Really, really important that we understand why we're saying the things that we say, especially when they're more prescriptive like that.
I think I'm thinking of our new yoga teachers coming out of their 200 hour where you're right, there's an incredible amount of pressure. They feel like they need to learn and learn and learn, maybe take a yoga therapy training or a 300 hour or a PT training or another anatomy training. And there's time for that for sure. And then at the same time, I'm thinking that it can really release the pressure if they say, stand in a comfortable mountain pose.
Exactly.
Right.
That's brilliant, because then something else can arise in mountain pose. That is the magic of the yoga, because what all the other disciplines don't have, they don't have what the yoga teacher has, which is this magical yoga thing. That's their job. That's the yoga teacher's job, is to bring the yoga, not to be a biomechanist.
Okay. This is such a good distinction. That's not our job.
It's really not. And so when you stand in a comfortable mountain pose, then you get to feel your feet on the ground, right? You get to sort of embody mountainness, and you may have an inner experience of connection with the earth or some other cool thing, that's really taking us inward in inquiry to kind of explore our experience, get to know ourselves. That's where yoga would like us to go, I think, way more than getting prescriptive and sort of fix-it oriented about the particulars of the body, especially when we just don't have the underlying foundational knowledge to really go there effectively.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is so good. So we've talked about we can let the cue go of where the knee is in relationship to the ankle. We're looking at the individual, of course, in all of these, because someone might say, I've recently had knee surgery or I have knee pain, and we might really modify things for them or ask them to do that.
Well, exactly. And we just ask, how does this feel?
Right.
Because I think a lot of times where we go with prescriptive anatomy cues is this weird story that the yoga teacher knows more about your body than you do. And I would much rather just ask the student to tell me, how does this feel? What happens if you go this far as opposed to this far? And let's just explore, because I'd much rather open up a doorway to inquiry so that this person becomes in charge of their own body over time and learns about it. And they learn where they like to put their knee.
Right. Okay. And then we can let the cues go around tree pose and where that foot has to go. We can sort of let that go. This whole thing about the shoulders. And I heard you say then the tailbone. We don't have to cue tuck the tailbone or and
I would be so happy if I never heard that again. Yeah.
okay. So that's on the list of like, do you have a list of cues? Cues I wish never existed.
That would be the big one, is tuck the tailbone.
Right.
Not to say there may be certainly postures or exercises where it's important to tuck the tailbone to complete the task, but as a postural cue, I think it's more problematic than not for a whole lot of reasons, including pelvic floor function.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I like to say like, see if you can spread the sits bones away from each other. Or see
That's
what
right.
it's like to untuck the tailbone.
Yeah, that's right. So, but if someone's going to say it, I just want them to know why they want to say it. What is it accomplishing that's useful? Because there may be a great answer to that. So, I really want to say, I mean, yes, I would throw that one out altogether personally, but if you like to say it, then start to investigate why, what's underneath that, what is it that it cultivates for the body, and be sure that that's what you're trying to cultivate. And then boom, brilliant, use it,
Are there any other cues that you would like us to take a look at, or can you think of any other examples?
Well, you mentioned shoulder position earlier in some other positions like downward dog, or maybe did you mention like extended side angle?
Yeah. Or extended mountain, because I hear so many different variations of where things quote unquote should be.
Yeah.
As a yoga practitioner, if I'm in a class and the teacher's like telling me where my body part should be, I might play around and try and see how does that feel. I feel like I've been practicing long enough that I just decide what it's going to look like.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the right direction to move in for practitioners, for sure. And it's also true that for new practitioners, they need some guidance. They need some descriptive guidance to understand what is this general shape we're doing, and maybe given a few options to try to kind of get to know how their body feels in it. So we have to have a starting point. I mean, that's the whole purpose for verbal cues in my mind, is give people a starting point, but don't throw out the freedom to have some wiggle in there and to explore some different ways of approaching it once you've got your starting point down. Because the starting point in my mind is just that, and it's what we're going to end up varying. So I like to tell the story that I spent a month a long time ago studying yoga at Desikacharya's place in India, and the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram. And we learned these crazy poses that we would like never do here. And I thought they were just crazy at the time, but what I loved was their approach to teaching the form. They would teach us the quote classical form, but they would say the whole reason you learn this form is so that you know what to modify. But the whole point is that you modify it. It's not that you get it right like this. It's that you know generally what you're modifying in order to support an actual practitioner who has an actual body with different shaped bones and different ranges of motion available to it and different injury history and all those things. So I love that concept, that we're not really trying to get everything in a certain correct way. We're trying to get it correct for our particular body. But anyway, back to where I was going with that, which was, shoulder position. So we could play around with shoulder position in those places. But when the shoulder is flexed up above the head, which often we say extended above the head, but it's actually shoulder flexion. So it's very confusing.
Yes.
But anyway, when the shoulder is flexed, there is a potential in a lot of people for shoulder impingement to happen, which is that pinchy feeling at the top of your shoulder, which happens when the humerus runs into the acromion process, the scapula. And sometimes that happens due to literally just the shape of your bones. And the acromion process in some people sticks way out, so the humerus runs into it quicker and creates that pinchiness, and it can lead to rotator cuff tendon problems. and tendonitis and all that. So the way to get around that is to have your shoulder externally rotated when your shoulder is flexed. So when your arm is in an overhead position, that if we externally rotate the shoulder, and I usually say roll the armpit toward your chin. That's just my way of cueing that.
Mm-hmm.
And we've created a little more space for the humerus to clear the acromion process. So if there's a pinching, that may help to get around it. But the sky won't fall necessarily if you don't do that. But that's one cue that I actually do use a good bit, because I want shoulders to be happy for the long term. And that one makes sense to me. It really does make sense anatomically. But here's the funny thing about that cue. I like to say armpit toward your chin because it's really referencing the part that I want to be moving. But let's say I'm in extended side angle and my arm is over my ear, and I hear the cue to turn my palm towards the floor. Right? The impetus for that cue is shoulder rotation.
Right.
But the problem is my forearm also rotates. It does pronation and supination, right? And those can happen separately. I mean, they do tend to follow each other, but it's absolutely possible that I could be here with my shoulder internally rotated, showing my armpit out for the world to see, but my palm still facing the ground.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
So my cue hasn't really done what I wanted it to do necessarily, because I referenced the wrong part of the body or a different part of the body from the one I wanted to have an action happen at. Right. So we have to talk about the actual part we're trying to move, talk about that part, because it may not happen if we talk about this other part that we think is related to it and is to some extent, but it's not as specific as maybe we were going for.
I love this. And I love also that you cued the armpit, that you weren't trying to figure out what the anatomical term is that your students won't know.
That's right. That's right.
Because if we start saying like quadriceps, biceps, triceps, they're confused enough. They're just like, where do I step my foot forward? What's moving?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So cues that I think are most effective are very, very simple. And, just saying less is usually a really good thing. I think there's just a lot of over cueing in general that we do in yoga. We just say way too many things about a posture. And you're right, it's very overwhelming. Most of it just goes right over people's heads because they're way back here thinking, how do I get my foot to step forward? And then I'm just trying to get into this general shape. And you're talking about things I've never heard of. It just gets a little overwhelming for people, unless they've been practicing forever and they're also interested in learning anatomy. But, I often will encourage teachers to keep the anatomy understanding like in their back pockets. It should inform teaching and especially inform sequencing, and it certainly will inform how you understand postures and what your goal is for using the posture. Like, why would you even practice this posture? We got to know that, actually. Is it just because everybody's doing it and it's cool? Or does it actually achieve some purpose in our practice? But so we want to have the anatomy in the background to understand all these things. But when it comes to actually teaching the class, it may not be what we end up talking about in a yoga class. It doesn't need to be an anatomy lesson. Right? Because we're there to bring the yoga, not the anatomy lesson, unless that's just wants to be your style, which is lovely too. But I think a lot of teachers feel pressured to talk a lot about anatomy in class. And I like to tell them, you don't have to unless you want to, and it's your style. But it's good to have in your back pocket because it's informing your teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, this is so good, because a lot of the time we think, oh gosh, I have to know every single part of the body and the variation of names for each part of the body, because even anatomy experts don't agree on all parts of the body.
Right.
And we can let that go. So that's another way to relieve the pressure. Are there some helpful cueing things that you suggest new teachers think about? Are there some tips and ideas that help with cueing?
Yes. So I can go ahead and kind of say I have a free download on cueing that has a bunch of tips in it.
Yay. That's so good.
And people can go and find that at anatomybites.com/cues, CUES. And I don't know if you can, it can include that in the notes or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that's a place where people can go and kind of download this free cheat sheet in a way about how to start to think about those cues. And some of the things on there are encouraging people understand why you're using cues, because there are a bunch of reasons we might use them, and it's good to reflect on that. So sometimes we use them just to help people find their way into a new position that they're not familiar with. Again, that's descriptive. Sometimes it's to guide a student to engage in the pose in a certain way to produce an inner quality or a certain effect. Or maybe we're seeing people in the shape and they haven't quite understood our initial instructions. So we're going to make sort of almost like a corrective cue in a way that adjusts the person's position because they haven't seemed to understand it the first time. And then those are all reasons we might use anatomical cues. But number one, we have to dive into the habits. What do we habitually say in every class about these poses? And just sort of play around with them and investigate, why do we say that? Maybe it's because I heard a bunch of other teachers saying it, or maybe, there's some other reason, but I want to start to get underneath that and ultimately find out if what I'm habitually saying is actually what I mean to be saying, because those might or might not match up. And it would be good to understand that. So kind of notice your habits. You might even record yourself teaching so that you pick up on, oh, wow, I say that cue all the time. Let me think about that.
Right.
And then some other tips are kind of approach your planning for a class with a little less stress around getting things right, but more interest in thinking about your goal. What is it you want to cultivate in this practice? Maybe it's more of an inner quality. Maybe it's a focus on a certain body part or something like that. But the cues would help to point to your goal. And if your goal is to promote a sense of grounding, let's say, because we've talked about that already, then, a lot of the anatomy cues may kind of melt away, and we may be going for more interoceptive cues that lead our students into just sensing inward to find out what it is that they feel in their bodies without us having to tell them all the time about how they're feeling,
Yeah.
So those would be really different sets of cues. If I'm going for an inner quality of groundedness and connectedness versus teaching an anatomy lesson, really different.
That's so good. I love how you said they can have this introspective practice, and instead of, because I hear yoga students say all the time, where should I be feeling this? And my answer always is, where are you feeling that?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. You're supposed to feel it wherever you're actually feeling it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so describe how it feels. I'm interested. You tell me, how does it feel in your body? This is so interesting. How can you describe those sensations? And that's really useful inquiry. But everyone may feel the pose in a different place, and that's appropriate. One of the cues I like to use, especially in response to that question in particular, where am I supposed to feel this, or how is this supposed to feel, is that, when we're stretching, a good rule of thumb is that we would like for the sensation of stretch to be a well-distributed sensation of stretch that's over a broad area of squishy stuff, muscles,
Right.
and not as interested in a sharp, pinpointed sensation that happens at a joint or at a attachment site. So just sort of going for that well-distributed sensation, that's a nice cue.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, because I won't be able to, that level of inquiry, I can't see in someone's form.
No.
Right? Whether their knees over their ankle or 2 inches past doesn't tell me what they're feeling inside their body. And that's where we want to go ultimately, because yoga, in my mind, and in my life, yoga wants us to know ourselves, to kind of like understand this whole experience of living in this body and having a mind and having a heart and living in the world at this time. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things to explore right now that are far more interesting than where your knee is over your ankle. Yeah.
Right.
So the more we can kind of move people inland to kind of feel and understand, then we get more to a transformative place, I think, with the whole yoga practice.
I love this. I love yoga wants us to know ourselves. That's my favorite quote today.
Yeah. Yoga wants us to know ourselves so that we can like be our best selves, actually.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. So you have one printable on a downloadable on cues. And what is the other one? You told me that you have another one for us.
I have another one on safety, which is related. And so those two go well together, I think, because a lot of our cues are tied to our notions about safety and our fear around having our students be unsafe.
Yeah.
So the safety download is at anatomybites.com/safety.
Very good.
So both of those are available. And Anatomy Bites is a new project I'm launching actually this fall.
Tell us about that, because aren't you working on this with Mado?
Yep, working on this with Mado of the Yoga Teacher Resource podcast. And she and I have been good friends for many, many years. And so we're collaborating on a project called Anatomy Bites, which is a monthly membership for yoga teachers. And it will deliver bite-sized anatomy content each month with short lectures and some short practices to integrate and embody that material, the topic for the month. And then a monthly kind of live Q&A discussion session with me that's available to members. And so the idea is that I want to help yoga teachers feel more confident in their understanding about the body and in their teaching, but also have like some focus and some guidance on learning anatomy that's really relevant for teaching yoga. Because if you go like get out some anatomy books or go even online learning anatomy, it's just like really overwhelming.
Yes.
So focus, guidance, and silliness will ensue, I'm sure, because I tend to get a little silly when I'm teaching. But having fun and having demystifying some of these issues, exactly like what we're talking about.
That's great. Oh, that's so good. So yoga teachers, I'll have this in our show notes. All of the links will be there when everything's ready.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this today. Anything else that you want to leave our connected yoga teachers with if they're thinking, oh my gosh, how do I work on my cues? How do I strengthen my cues? Any last bit?
I just would say one of my mottos is less is more, really less is more. And especially when it comes to teaching online, it presents such an incredible challenge when you can't see your students very well. So if you can't see your students, it's really hard to know what to say about what their bodies are doing.
Yes.
So if you're developing classes that are using basic sort of simple postures and simple movements, you can kind of just go ahead and settle into the trust that the body's designed to move in all these ways. And stuff is probably not unsafe, but it's always good to just meet privately with your students if they have special injuries. And those are the ones that are going to be more, relevant to your modifications and maybe changing cues. So anyway, I would just say less is more. Take the stress off your shoulders to know everything, right? And fix everything and focus on bringing the yoga, that magical inner experience that is yoga. That's the gift of the yoga teacher.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me. It was fun.
Connected yoga teachers, Libby and I got into a bit more of discussion around safety and frailty in yoga, and I wanted to make sure that you got to hear that. So here's the clip of that for you.
Yeah, I think that when we get caught up in notions about safety and these particular things about where the knee's supposed to be and all this kind of stuff we talked about, it tends to send a message to students about frailty or fragility, I guess we could say, that this body isn't very stable and it's liable to fall apart at any moment, that we have to be very careful with it, And if we can shift our language about how we're speaking about the body we might be able to send a message that's more about resilience and about all kinds of possibilities and about strength and stability, which is more accurate because the body is very resilient and very strong.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. Thank you so much. Connected Yoga Teachers, I am so excited to hear from you. Let's jump into the Facebook group or into the comments section of the show notes page and continue this discussion. What are the cues that you love to use? What are the ones that really have not served you as a student or a teacher that you've kind of thrown out along the way? And how have you worked on your cues? How have you built that practice up? Also, I wanted to let you know 2 ways that I'm really excited that we can work together. Soon the doors to pelvic health professionals will open. I'm telling you early because if you get on the wait list, and the way to do that is to go to pelvichealthprofessionals.com, and you can see right there, join the wait list button right on our homepage. When you're on the wait list, you find out a little bit early, and there are some bonuses also that go out to our wait list. So if you are a yoga teacher that is excited about pelvic health and working with people who have a pelvis, and you really want to find out more about how you can serve those students, make sure to check out pelvichealthprofessionals.com. There's also a resources page where you can listen to podcasts and also read articles all about pelvic health. The other thing I'm excited about is what I talked about earlier in today's episode is this planning workshop or planning party that Amanda McKinney and I are doing. It's happening live on October the 30th. You can sign up for the replay if you'd like to. And I'm not sure yet if we're actually going to let the replay be available for a while, but probably. So make sure to check this out if you're interested in planning for your yoga business, if you really want to take things up a notch in 2021. And you can find that under trainings and events at theconnectedyogateacher.com. And I want to give a huge shout out of thank you to you, dear listener. You make this podcast possible by tuning in each and every week, and it means so much when we get to hang out and spend some time together. Thank you also to our team over here at the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Suzanne, Crunch, Nick, and Sinead. Oh my goodness. These 4 people do so much behind the scenes and so much to make each and every podcast possible. And I also want to give a shout out because I know that a few of them have some openings in their specialty that they do. Suzanne is our podcast editor. And if you're looking for help with a podcast, I would highly recommend reaching out to her. Crunch is our show notes writer. I know that she actually has a couple of spots open. So if you're looking for help with your blog, your website, the wording with your emails, anything to do with words and getting that message out there, Crunch is the person. We'll make sure to link to her website. Nick specializes in working with people who are dealing with pain, also with yin yoga and doing some VA work. So reach out to Nick for sure if you're interested in yin yoga or VA work. And Sinead does a huge amount of work, not only for pelvic health professionals, but also for the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast as a VA. And I happen to know that she might have space for one more person. So we'll link to her contact information or our email address or her website. Sinead, I feel like I don't know if you have a website. She's great at keeping our website up to date, that's for sure. Okay, Connected Yoga Teachers, I am about to sign off here, but before I do, I really want to know, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself? Maybe that's some kind of self-care practice that you do, your yoga practice, or staying connected to your community in some way so that you can share the yoga that lights you up.